Welcome, everybody. My name is Amanda Ellis. I'm with the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory and delighted to be the moderator of today's panel. We have with us Anitra THORHAUG, and I will introduce everybody more fulsomely when they come to speak, who is the president of the Greater Caribbean Energy and Environment Foundation. We have THEODOSSIU, who is professor at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. We have Paul WERBOS, who is adjunct professor with the Kummer Institute Center for AI and Autonomous Systems, and Dr. Ted Manning, who is president of Tourisk, Inc. So I'm seeing that slide has not yet come up, so we will launch into our session, which is solutions to reduce ecologically rooted uncertainty and insecurity. And this is certainly the defining issue of our time. We are meeting at what is most consequential. The world population has quadrupled in the last 80 years, and we are now a very big presence on a small planet. Not only is climate change and its consequences increasing at a pace far faster than scientists originally predicted, but global politics are arguably more volatile than at any time since the Cold War, fueled by a rise in both authoritarianism and populism, exacerbated by and misinformation spread through social media platforms, and now increasingly accelerated through AI. There's widespread concern about what futures may look like. The US has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, and there are now over 50 estimated state conflicts. Biodiversity loss is rapidly accelerating. So against this depressing backdrop, our panel will attempt to make sense of these trends and address solutions to reduce ecologically rooted uncertainty and insecurity. So it's now my great honor to introduce Professor Anitra THORHAUG, who not only, as I mentioned earlier, is president for the Greater Caribbean Energy and Environment Foundation, but also the US Club of Rome president and the Yale Institute of Carbon Sequestration lead for solutions that are terrestrial. So Anitra, you have got an illustrious background. We're very grateful to you for agreeing to set the scene on where we are today. If you would like to share your slides, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share my slides. And first, I would like to ask the question. I'm going to begin with the question and end with the question. Can the planet Earth be secure if its key ecosystems are insecure? I think that's a very important question. But first, I will share my slides so that you know why I'm saying this and what I'm saying. So the FAO portion of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, which has charge of forests and fisheries, has said that 85% of the world's forests have been completely decimated, killed, and degraded by mankind. And what we have left is 15% of the world's forests. Where do we have them? In two major places. One is in the boreal areas of Canada, Alaska, and Russia. And the second is in the tropical area, where we have basically about 28% in Latin America, Central America, and in the Cameroon forests and Congo forests in Africa, and a very small amount in Southeast Asia. One of our important members of the Club of Rome, Robert Costanza, has valued with his group, and the red are the important and very valuable ecosystems. And here you see the same place where the forests are in Latin America value, and you see the boreal forests in Alaska and in Canada being of value, and the Russian forests here. And then you also see the Cameroon forest, Southeast Asia forest, and a tip of the tropical forest in Australia. Where are the remaining mangroves, corals, and seagrass, which are the key underwater ecosystems? And to the left on the top is the picture of the mangrove. So you see they range in the Bight of Guinea and up to about Guinea-Bissau in Africa, and in the central between Kenya and South Africa on the East Coast, in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico in Latin America, and in Southeast Asia, basically, and Northern Australia, in Indonesia particularly. These are the corals. The bottom illustration shows where the major corals are. And of course, they're all across the Pacific Ocean. They're also around Australia and in the Caribbean Sea. And I have been working now for about 50 years on restoring ecosystems and held many conferences on restoring ecosystems. And from that, and from all the experts thinking together, we have degraded about 50,000 kilometers square of mangroves, and we should be putting back 50,000 kilometers square of mangrove. And the cost would probably be about $10 billion. And the good news there is it's done with people from developing countries, because that's where most of the mangroves are. And the same with corals. We've lost about 70,000 kilometers square. It would cost about 30 billion to put them back. Seagrass, we've lost about 100,000 kilometers square, and we should put back 50,000, and that'll cost about 30 billion. And temperate forests are very well known. We've been putting back temperate forests for something like 150 years, and on a smaller scale, more of that. And to put back about 36 million would cost something like 34 billion, because much of this is done where there are really good technologies. And those are done in the temperate zones, which are North America and Europe and across Eastern Europe. The tropical forests are now being looked at and put back in large amounts. We've lost about 35 million kilometers square, and we should be putting back about 35. And that would cost someplace in the middle 50 billions. So altogether, we should put back about 130 billion. We should put that amount of investment into this, government by government, industry by industry. This is the problem, that we have the technology, but we do not have the political will. And I don't think we have proper plans, government by government, either in the countries that we call newly industrializing or developing countries, nor in giant countries like my own, we do not have a cohesive plan to put back forests, coastal key ecosystems, and underwater systems such as the corals.
Thank you so much, Anitra. Those are wonderful points. And I think when you talk about the costs of restoration, that is an obvious solution. But when we look at the costs of not restoring, they're much greater. So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, estimates that we get from nature every year somewhere between 95 and $125 trillion in free ecosystem services. And because our very rudimentary economic systems, speaking as an economist, a trained economist, don't take those into account, we use the very old-fashioned and not adequate measure of GDP instead. So thank you for that wonderful overview with some very practical solutions of how we could.
My final question is, can we afford not to regenerate our ecosystems so that we continue to have this degradation, which goes right into your
Absolutely. That is, I think that is the key point. So thank you very much. That was a wonderful beginning with some very practical solutions. We move now to Professor Nicolaos THEODOSSIou from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, who is also the chair of the SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And I know too that, Nico, if I may, you're also with the UN Network Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for the introduction. I will try to be brief, but I would like to outline a few things. One of the things that we do in this Sustainable Development Solutions Networks, we are trying to acknowledge the status of each country in their effort to implement the SDGs. So every year we publish a report. And this year we had the same results regarding the two biodiversity SDGs, SDG 14 and 15, life below water and life on land, which are amongst those who are particularly off track. And as a matter of fact, these two goals are by far the most underreported SDGs, which is something that indicates the need for more research and analysis on the ecosystems. So these two goals in particular face major challenges, showing no or very limited progress since 2015 when the SDGs were introduced, mainly due to human-driven pressures, weak governance, the prioritization of short-term economic development over long-term environmental health. There is a global coordination, but enforcement, finance, and political will lag behind the urgency of the environmental crisis. We have overfishing, pollution, especially plastics and microplastics, climate change, and the lack of marine protected areas, which are amongst the most important pressures that aquatic systems face. On the other hand, as Anitra emphasized, deforestation, biodiversity loss, land degradation, weak enforcement, and political will restrain the efforts to improve the implementation of the life on land goal. There is still a huge gap between the ability of high-income countries to meet the SDGs and the challenges faced by the low-income countries to follow the same track. There's a huge gap. While the high-income countries continue to invest within their own borders and disregard the financial and technological barriers that the low-income countries face, global challenges like climate change will continue to expand and impact the whole planet. For example, we expect Africa to reach its energy demand peak by 2050, 2060. If they follow the same path that we did in energy production from carbon-based sources, this will lead to a disaster not only for Africa, but for the whole world. Climate change does not recognize borders. But since this conference is also about peace and security, we need to acknowledge that, as you already mentioned, there are still numerous conflicts around the world. The ongoing, for more than 3 years now, war in Ukraine is not just a humanitarian and geopolitical crisis, it is also an ecological disaster. It will take decades to restore the damaged ecosystems, to clean up toxic sites, and to safely demine contaminated areas. Environmental justice and recovery must be a key part of any long-term peace and reconstruction effort. Shelling, bombings, missile strikes, everything that we hear on TV every day have destroyed forests, wetlands, nature reserves. There are minefields in both land and the Black Sea, which is something very, very troubling and dangerous ecosystems. Clearance will take decades. That's certain. The war in Ukraine has unleashed an ecological disaster. We need to acknowledge that. Despite, I repeat, the humanitarian issue, that's the first priority, of course. We have widespread deforestation, soil and water contamination, destruction of ecosystems, long-term health risks, and recovery will require international support. Reconstruction funds, environmental remediation, and comprehensive demining efforts, probably spanning decades. And just a final remark, Amanda, I followed a panel discussion where you participated yesterday, and you emphasized the need to upgrade the SDGs. I totally agree with this statement. And the SDGs are not written in stone. They can and need to be reviewed, revised, updated, and of course, upgraded. On the other hand, they are a very good effort to face these global challenges. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time and start all over again. We have a very good reference status. We need to build on that and pave our way to a more sustainable future.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Nico. I couldn't agree more. And when we look at the fact we moved from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, I think we need an upgrade 3, which could be the regenerative development goals, to take Anitra's points about what needs to be regenerated that we've destroyed. And Nico, you made 3 excellent points that I wanted to just emphasize for our audience. First of all, that life below water and life on land are the most off track and underreported. And the Times Higher Education actually does a survey of universities, and we're very proud at ASU to be #1 for life below water with the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, and then the work that we're doing here in Hawaii. And Anitra, you'll be happy to know that Dr. Greg Asner, who's one of our brilliant scientists, is trying to build the world's largest coral reef restoration facility here. So second, you mentioned enforcement, finance, and political will. And it is really shocking that some 3.5 billion people in developing countries live in countries that are spending more now on debt servicing as a result of the aftermath of the COVID pandemic than they are on health and education. So there is a real critical issue around this. And finally, the war in Ukraine. This is such a tragic reality that, in fact, it is an ecological crisis and an environmental crisis, as you mentioned. I wanted to raise here the concept of ecocide, which has now been included by the EU as a very real concept alongside of genocide. And so the work that Jojo Mehta and her team have been doing is, I think, very worthwhile. So please, audience, look into ecocide and see if you can bring your support to that as well. Well, it's now my pleasure to move to our third panelist, and this is Dr. Paul WERBOS, who is really an expert in the scientific world, having spent almost 30 years at the National Science Foundation, and now being with the Kummer Institute Center for AI and Autonomous Systems. So, Paul, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Climate is an area where I was very ignorant. This first slide represents what my views were in the beginning of 2009, which was the year of climate in Washington, D.C. I worked at the National Science Foundation. I handled areas like electric power, and they assigned me that year to help in the climate legislation. And I worked in both political parties' decision-making groups on climate. And that was a hell of an experience. At the beginning of that year, my beliefs were like what you see on this slide. I think I've got a YouTube out there on this. On the precautionary principle, I knew the IPCC reports, and frankly, climate change didn't seem as bad to me as I thought. The numbers seemed to justify rational economic action, but the numbers did not seem to justify life or death. And after that, starting in 2009, I learned that things are quite a bit different from what I thought. I have a slide here on life on Earth. I think the issue is not something we can repair with the forests. I think the issue is much bigger than that. I think it's very clear that life on Earth itself is in danger. My ability to handle the screens is somewhat in danger, however. There is, maybe I can come back to a slide I have here.
And Paul, while you're finding that slide, I'm just going to echo your words that life on Earth is in danger. And I know when we were negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015, I can tell you that I and most of my ambassadorial colleagues at the United Nations did not understand the full import of the science. And this is why I'm now totally convinced that the science to policy interface is a critical one. Beautiful slide.
Now, can you see my graph?
Yes, we can. That looks
right. Okay. In the year 2009, I established a collaboration. The head of geosciences at NSF introduced me to a guy named Peter Ward. And he said, Peter Ward is the #1 expert, frontline scientific expert on mass extinctions of life in the past. This chart is one of those things. There have been several times in the history of the Earth when the level of H2S in the air and the radiation were high enough they would have killed all humans if there had been humans alive. When I heard Peter's talk at NSF, my first meeting, I was amazed when he ended up by saying, by the way, I've looked at these graphs, and the graph we're on right now exactly resembles the graph I have from the historical record. Looks to me, at the rate we're going, we're heading towards the exact same outcome. Everybody dies. At that point, I didn't say he's right or he's wrong. I said, I want to find out. And we have a joint paper posted at a place called buildaworld.org, buildaworld.org. I think I sent you the URL. I have a joint paper with Ward and an expert on ocean currents. And the bottom line is, when we got deeper and deeper into it, it's real. So I'm not here to fix my local beaches. I'm not here to make people happy in the local tropics. I'm here to keep us alive. And I'm really worried about the very life of the human species. So then the next question is, what in the world can we do about it? And for that, I should go back to the slides I did present here. I agree with everybody who says we're not doing enough, but we could be doing more. So bottom line is, we have to ask, what can we do strategically to minimize the probability of human extinction at minimum cost and perhaps at a profit? On my website, WERBOS.com, there is a URL for climate. And on that website, I offer a 5-point plan based on real strategic economics. I argue that there are 5 things we need to do for maximum efficiency. And you don't see the slide. That's really sad. There are 5 critical things that we would be doing if we were rational. And of these 5 things, 3 of them reduce the net CO2. So the first of the 5 is to reduce the net greenhouse gases in electricity generation. And since I ran electric power at the National Science Foundation, I knew a lot about how to do that. And it turns out we have cost-effective opportunities to deeply reduce greenhouse gases from electric power far beyond anything I see the European Union doing or the US today. And the reason for that is we have things called vested interests.
Yes.
There are plenty of people in Europe and the US who make lots and lots of money from high-cost technologies using state power to enforce them. One of the more interesting examples are the people with small nuclear reactors. The small nuclear reactor people, I've met some of the key lobbyists, like from Westinghouse. They want to make the whole world nuclear, and they think they can make money doing that. The only problem is, you look at the Japan Sea, the danger of nuclear war is very serious. And we don't need to, because we have solar power today, which is cheaper. So 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be going back again to Chile. The US and the EU have huge problems. But right at the moment, there's a thing called the Solar Energy Research Consortium of Chile, the National Solar Energy Research Consortium. I've been on their advisory committee for many years. I'm going to be going back in 2 weeks. And I have a beautiful slide showing what they did. They have an advanced kind of solar farm technology. Long ago, when I worked at NSF and the Department of Energy, I thought that simple power tower solar thermal power was a boring lost cause, but then there are breakthroughs. There's a company called Brayton Energy, and it turns out that there's some other companies called Heliogen and General Electric, and those companies now have available commercially a new way to convert heat from the sun into electricity, which gives us costs much superior to this advanced nuclear technology. And they've demonstrated in a large scale in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, where I'm going to be going again in 2 weeks. I've been there many times. And if you combine the best new Brayton Energy conversion technology with the big power tower technology they have demonstrated at scale in Chile. By the way, in the Gulf states, there is also a big solar power tower farm, even bigger than they have in Chile. If you combine that with the new proven Brayton technology in the US, use intelligent control, you end up with something much cheaper than what people are paying for today. People in the European Union would see their electric bills go down, and the whole continent would be more secure if only they would implement this kind of technology. And the main reason they're not implementing it is that the vested interests who speak to the bosses don't want the bosses to know that this option exists. IEEE asked me to lead a study of all of the pieces and of all the new climate options, including this, including others. And I was hoping we would produce a book, but then something happened. What happened is I got a patent for something in the AI area, which was the previous session in this conference. And it turns out that the new AI is important to electric power, but it's important to many other things. And since I was the guy who invented a new quantum technology, I felt a duty to switch. I turned this over to a guy I knew who had run $1 billion project in the US government. And I still haven't seen the book come out, but all the information is there. The information is available to anybody who's interested. They still have these massive solar farms in Chile, combined with proven new technology available from the US for Brayton Energy to convert heat to electricity. You combine them, you reduce the cost of electricity, and you totally get rid of the carbon dioxide.
Fantastic.
There was one last slide in my set, if it ever comes up. As part of that same study, we looked at the possibility of electric airplanes. And there has been a breakthrough in batteries, which makes it possible to build a 777 class airplane, 4,000 kilometer range, all electric. It's another way to totally get rid of the carbon dioxide outputs, and it reduces costs. I've been hoping that Senator Murkowski would learn about this, because Anchorage Airport could be making a huge amount of money by having low-cost electric airplanes flying back and forth to the US and to Asia.
And Paul, you'll be very pleased to know we have electric aircraft already operating in Hawaii, inter-island. So that was just a wonderful tour de force. Thank you very much. I think your key points about reducing the net greenhouse gases and electricity generation, critical. We know that we're still 75% of the greenhouse gases are coming from the power generation sector, yet we know that it is more expensive. So wind and solar are less than 2 cents a kilowatt hour. We know that coal and oil and gas are around 8. We know from the IMF that fossil fuel subsidies are $7.1 trillion a year, 2 trillion in explicit and 5 trillion in implicit. And without those, you're quite right, the vested interests would not be able to continue doing business. So this was such a great tour de force. We know the technologies are available. We know energy security could be heightened by using them. How do we actually address this critical issue of vested interests and help people understand one of the things that came up in the chat, which was mentioned that people think that they have to choose, Alex, between conservation and food on the table. In fact, it's the opposite. If we don't conserve, we are not going to have food on the table. And I think, Ted, life on Earth is in danger is a pretty fabulous tagline, and we will be using that in our LinkedIn post. So thank you so much, all of you. I'm going to come back to you for a 1-minute close. And I'm now delighted to move to our fourth and final panelist, Dr. Ted Manning, president of Tourisk, Inc., which is a global sustainable development consulting firm. Paul has experience working for the Government of Canada, UN agencies, and small communities on all continents. Thank you for being with us, Ted.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not going to disagree with any of the folks that we've heard, but I am going to say that I think the real problem is people. That we are the cause, and most of us don't even understand it. Secondly, the real emphasis of my talk is to try and convince people that they actually are part of the environment and they might wish to remain part of it. Keeping people alive on Earth, at least some, would be a really good idea. Now, what I'm going to comment, however, is that while the causes of problems appear to be immense and collective, the solutions are almost all local, or at least realized at a local level. They are usually integrated, collective, and they spawn success stories at a relatively local area. The real challenge is communication and to get people to actually understand that they may have applicable solutions, which ultimately can be rolled up and probably required policy changes and very significant economic, social, and other changes. The fact is that most people would like to have another couple of Hummers rather than a tree living in their front yard. And that's the real issue we have. Now, what I would like to do, if I may put one slide on, this is from a project that we've been doing for several years associated with the Club of Rome and associated with other members of the Club of Rome on well-being. And when we talk sustainable development, most people see these values as being critical to that core. Most are not economic, they are social and related to their environment, related to their society, related to their security, and ultimately to their survival. And I'll just leave that there because that's one of the products of the project we've been doing. And I have personally been over 150 countries doing surveys and work with people to try and identify at a relatively local level what they really want in terms of their community, in terms of the ecosystem they live in, and if they are selling it in terms of its service as a destination or a World Heritage Site, to try and make sure that these attributes are actually sustained. So when we worked to develop the SDGs, this kind of work was behind it to make sure that almost all of them were brought in. And many of the indicators that we had developed for various UN agencies were just the same. Those measurable attributes of what people really wanted to have and obtain from their environment and the communities and economies they built on it. So the logic of this is that virtually everything is delivered locally, that almost every success story we can document, from totally off-grid communities and islands in the Atlantic or the Caribbean, from people's homes that are off-grid and have been for 20 years, from people's approaches to their own lives to create a satisfactory lifestyle for them, their families, and their communities, all fall into the example of very local and hopefully applicable elsewhere. Now, the biggest problem we have is people do not understand risk. And certainly modern society, particularly in the West and in Europe, does not view simply having a nice place to live in, but rather to make a large pile of money. And their priorities, therefore, are exactly why they are not the slightest bit interested in spending a few bucks more for food or even eggs, but rather would demolish something of immense long-term value with no thoughts about it. And certainly the social network is causing them to think that way. They're being programmed all the time as consumers, not as people. And quite frankly, nobody cares if a consumer survives as long as their money does. So I'm looking really at from the point of view of a social scientist as well as a physical scientist, and I'm both, to say if we don't see them together, if we don't integrate them, if we don't understand that the cheapest thing, of course, is not to destroy them, and the next cheapest thing is maybe to try and sustain them or retain them and rehabilitate them, we aren't going to win. And that's really the bottom line. So can we accumulate good success stories from all around the world? Well, yes, we are. Do you want to hear about them? Maybe you don't.
Well, Ted, I think we do want to hear about them. And we have an organization here in Hawaii called the Local 2030 UN Islands Hub, which shares good practices between islands similarly. And the points that you make about the need to bring together the physical and the social sciences are so critical, because we do have the solutions and we know what we need to do. It is a matter of political will and bringing the understanding of the current crisis to politicians to understand we really have a rapidly narrowing window for action.
Well, we have developed a series of workshops around the world, and now a group of observatories of sustainability, many of them on small islands, just to share what works.
Fantastic. Well, Ted, if you could share that in the chat with everybody, a link, I think that would be most welcome for all of our attendees. And thank you, attendees, for the very active participation in the chat and the wonderful comments. So what I would like to do now is turn to each of our panelists in turn for a one-line takeaway. What would you like our audience to take away and remember today? What is their action item from you? So Anitra, starting with you.
Okay. So the first is, can the planet be secure if the ecosystems are not secure? And can we afford to not regenerate the 85% of the ecosystems which have been lost by man's inhumanity to the ecosystems themselves over 3, perhaps 4 millennia?
Thank you. Very powerful. Nico.
My key message would be we need to realize that we're all in this together. And we need to act together if we want to go somewhere to a sustainable future. The ecosystems, we are a part of the ecosystems. We are not, the ecosystem is not something that is against us, it's opposite to us. We're a part of the ecosystem. If the ecosystems do not survive, we will not survive. We are just the same thing. We're just a part of the system.
Thank you. Paul.
I listed 4 threats to the very existence of humans in this century. This is a unique century. We have powers to kill ourselves that we never had. Climate was number 2 on my list. Number 1 was what we talked about in the past hour, but they're all connected. Strategically, in order to survive, we need to work together and cooperate. We need new networks to cooperate and understand, and above all, to think the right way strategically. And this slide is how I still think about the climate issue. We need people in all 5 sectors. I was really happy when IEEE was going to sponsor an effort to combine all 5 sectors. We have papers on new radical possibilities in all 5 sectors. We don't have that much time now, but there is radically new technology that can really help us in all 5 sectors. We need people who can help. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. We have to specialize, but we have to work together, and we need to do all 5 as intelligently as we can.
Great, thank you. And Ted, the final word to you.
We must replace greed and growth now. And if we don't, we are not going to be able to resolve these kinds of issues. As long as we enshrine greed as the prime directive for humanity and ignore all else, society, environment, community, all of the above, we are not likely to be successful. The key questions we've got to look at, and they are all each worth a lecture and examples, are what are the key levers to take all of these examples of success that we can find in places around the world and turn them into more common vernacular and actually application. Why is it important to focus on regeneration, resilience, or improvement, and not just sustainability? Because we don't want necessarily to sustain what we have now. And what are the means of sharing, scaling them up, and using advocacy effectively to the places who really need to learn this stuff? So the next question for all of us is, how do we build an action plan, and who do we have to deal with to make it happen?
Thank you so much. Very rich conversation. Thank you to all of those who participated today so actively and fulsomely in the chat. And what a wonderful note on which to close. We must replace greed and growth now. And let's be working on that next version of the Sustainable Development Goals, the regenerative development goals. Thank you, everybody, so much for these solutions.